You are listening to an exclusive interview on Bass Musician Magazine. The interview starts now.
Hey everybody, this is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist Will Turpin.
Hey man, how you doing?
Doing great. Some of you might know Will from his work with Collective Soul. Others of you might have seen some of his, I'll call it solo work, but independent projects, such as The Lighthouse back in 2012. And we'll touch base about all of this stuff as we go forward, but let's kind of take a step back. How did you get started in bass, Will?
I mean, you know, I'm a musician really from my earliest memory. Piano was my first instrument that I kind of studied with a teacher, and I started that around 8 years old. But it's important to note my whole household. My father owned a recording studio, which is really where Collective Soul got its start as well. But my father owned a recording studio, so every instrument was in my house. Musicians were constantly in my house, watching my father's bands. So I was around every instrument at an early age. Drums, I started playing drums as well before 10 years old. Learned a fretboard around 13, started picking up guitar. And while my dad was a bass player predominantly in all of the bands and stuff he would do, I never really, in high school and such, when I was doing bands, I never found myself playing bass. And the short version of how I ended up playing bass with Collective Soul is that, the 5 original guys, we were all extremely close friends. I had watched Ed work on his songwriting and crafting in my father's studio. He's 6-7 years older than me, about 6.5 years my senior. So his friends were getting married, getting real jobs, and me and my friends came along, including his brother. And we respected everything Ed had been doing with his solo career and his other CDs. And kind of like, as his friends got married and got real jobs, here we come. And that's kind of the short version of it. But when I committed to Collective Soul, I didn't own a bass. And I just knew that the chemistry and the vibe would be right. We were all really close friends, and we thought the same way about music. And Ed's songwriting was extremely strong. So that's really how I started playing bass, just by wanting to be in a band with that lineup and those guys.
Kind of the necessity, if you will. It was the instrument that was needed for that. And that goes all the way back to 1993, doesn't it? So this has been...
Right. That would have been like fall of 93 when I committed full-time to the rock and roll dream, and I knew that the spot I needed to fill was bass.
Moving forward again, Collective Soul's been very active over the years. I see that there's a whole... you've got tour dates coming up, lots of activity there. But on top of that, you have the work that you've been doing kind of on your own. And of course, again, I mentioned The Lighthouse 2012. And this very week, we're fortunate to be talking Serengeti Drivers, a new CD's dropping on June 8th.
This Friday.
Yes.
Yeah. Very
cool. Tell us a little bit about that project. One thing I will mention is that when we hear... I'm trying to make the clarification about a solo piece, because it's not just you by yourself. It's you with other musicians.
Right.
So it's a kind of a different band that's not Collective Soul.
Right. And some of my Collective Soul bandmates are recording on it. As a matter of fact, Serengeti Drivers includes 16 other musicians other than me, all handpicked and great friends of mine. Everybody's a great friend of mine that's on this record. Some of these guys go back 20 years as far as my relationship with them. When I sit down and write these songs for my solo stuff, I'm usually behind a piano or Rhodes. There's a handful of songs that I'm behind an acoustic guitar. But, I record these songs, get these ideas, and just record basic, iPhone recordings to remember ideas and such. Over time, I figure which ones kind of start rising to the top as strong songs. And then I start to formulate an idea of who might be best to record. And for me, it's like, obviously Collective Soul is my gig, right? So with the solo stuff, I do need a band, and I've got a band that's about to go out and perform, but I don't necessarily need the same guys for every song. So it's kind of fun and experimental for me to pick different guys that I know that have this talent or maybe this style. And like I said, keep those relationships going. So it's, Serengeti Drivers is 11 songs, and in between time of touring with Collective Soul and dealing with other stuff, a period of 3 years, I got the record done. Yeah.
Nice. Well, and part of what I noticed, and certainly we can expand a little on it, is that in general, the feel of the music is softer than Collective Soul. Yeah, I find that Collective Soul is kind of hard charging driving, and not that this doesn't have energy, but
Right.
it has a different feel. There's a fair amount of I'm taking away a southern rock vibe with some of it that seemed a little different than what I've been hearing with Collective Soul. But a lot of emphasis on the vocals and the harmonies. And as you're working this, a really nice strong bass presence. And this is one of the things that so many times I think when there's not a bassist predominantly involved in the project, the engineer tends to mix us down so that you can feel that we're there, but you don't
Right.
hear it as clearly. And so
Yeah.
track after track, I can hear what you're playing and the nuances and all those details, which of course appeals to me because that's usually what I'm straining to pick out,
It's kind of true with the mix. A lot of mixers want to focus on the vocal, obviously, and then that lead guitar part or whatever that mid-range instrument is that's the counter. Yeah, I think you really have to hear the parts. I mean, I'll go back to all my heroes. I could hear their parts. I could hear everything Paul McCartney played. I could hear everything John Paul Jones played. Sting is one of my big influences. I can hear everything he played. So I definitely like a mix to be a mix, although vocals do need to be out front. That's just common things that the humans want to hear. They want to hear the lyrics and they want to hear the melody. As far as mixing goes, yeah, I mean, and the musicianship involved, I just, I go by feel. I just create by feel. And with Collective Soul, it's a rock band. So we start a lot of songs with a riff, distorted guitar, bass. We start with rock and riffs, and we just got out of the studio about a month ago. We go straight for the energy, and the songs allow for it. With some of the stuff on Serengeti Drivers, I consciously there's 3 or 4 tunes where I consciously made sure I felt like it was a little bit of a challenge, but not necessarily a challenge. But it was a conscious decision to not have a distorted guitar on there at all.
Yeah,
acoustic piano or Rhodes, acoustic guitar. Bass and drums and vocals. So I actually did make a conscious decision to not go for as much distorted guitar. That being said, there's plenty of distorted guitar on there. It just doesn't sound like a true rock band.
Well, I could certainly see where it would have a big popular appeal. So very, very get your foot tapping, very easy to listen to. Kind of the thing you'd want to have in your car as you're driving along, and you're kind of going, okay, yeah, this is a nice variety.
Yeah, I still think the groove and the vibe and the energy is different, but I still think it's just as strong.
Totally. With the title Serengeti Drivers, what kind of thought? What were you motivated about? Because it's not African music.
It's not related to the sound of the music at all.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's a lot of double entendre there. I'm kind of using Serengeti Drivers to reference the musicians that I pulled together, but the actual name Serengeti Drivers came from a dream sequence I was having, where I was walking in the desert, just as comfortable as walking down the street, but I was all alone, and I didn't know where I was going. And it's not like it's kind of one of those things that all who wander aren't lost. Like I definitely didn't know where I was, but I had no insecurities or wasn't necessarily feeling like I was lost. And then in the middle of that moment of just being in the desert, I'd see friends driving by, kind of at a distance, but they could see me and I could see them. And they'd be having a really good time. They'd always be like upbeat and laughing, and then they'd wave at me, and I'd kind of wave back like, okay, yeah, there's so-and-so. Or I specifically remember one time my Collective Soul bandmates were in it was like a 70s van, or maybe it could have been a station wagon. It was all dreamy, so I don't remember what specifics were going on, but they'd wave, I'd wave back and be like, oh yeah, there's Ed and Dean and Johnny and Jesse. And they'd keep going and I'd keep walking. And there was never like a moment where I was like, save me or come pick me up or anything. And that was just the gist of the dream. I would see somebody driving in the desert. I was walking all alone, and it would be different people. And that was totally the gist of that sequence I was having, or that dream recurring dream I was having. And so after thinking about it and kind of mulling over it over definitely a period of 6 months to a year, I was kind of always thinking about what the name of this record could be. When Serengeti Drivers popped in my head, it just meant so much to me, and a lot of, like I said, double entendre.
Nice.
And the dream sequence. So yeah, that's where that comes from, man.
Very cool.
Maybe I need a psychologist or a dream doctor to tell me what the heck that meant.
No, hey, it's all good there. And tell us a little bit about how you get your sound. I know everybody's always interested in gear when it comes to players.
I've been using Ampeg rigs for a long time. I went straight to Ampeg just based off of, in 1994, just based off of reputation. And Michael Anthony also back then in 95 was instrumental in helping me get some Ampeg contacts going too, now that I remember. And I used those the Heritage series, Ampegs, the heads and the cabinets. Pedals I like to use, again, well, I'll go back to Ampeg. There's there's a DI that Ampeg has that is really cool. It's got their overdrive distortion button built into the DI. So that's the first thing I go to is the DI. I come out of that DI, give the front of house guy a clean signal just with the DI. If I hit the scratch or the fuzz button, he will get that. But that's just that one pedal on the DI. So I do that sparingly. And then I send another signal out to some other pedals. I got a couple JHS pedals, Morning Glory, a stereo chorus. It's a 4x4 Bigfoot on the front of it. But it's got a real fuzzy distortion that I use on just a handful of songs. And then that goes to my amp rig, and he gets that signal as well. So I'm sending actually 3 signals to front of house. There's a mic on the rig. There's the line out of just all my pedals. And then there's the clean DI signal. So he actually gets 3 signals front of house. And I'd have to say I'm probably 90% direct by the time it gets to front of house. Add a little bit of mic for some ambiance, but keep it clean.
Gotcha. Well, and it lets you feel it too.
When I'm using the in-ears, it's just so easier to dial up. You want it, you hit that knob when it's a direct signal, it's right there for you. So it feels cleaner.
And bass-wise, what are you playing on?
Yeah, my father influenced me there as well. I've always liked Fender Precision and jazz, especially in the studio. And in the 90s, I toured with a matching pair of Precisions for the longest time, which I still have and I still use in the studio. I've been with Ernie Ball and Music Man for a long time, and they're amazing there. They've done some custom work for me in the last decade. So I use the bongo bass a lot live. Really cool sound up and down the neck. It sounds even. It's also a road warrior. Not a single one of my bongos has ever let me down. And, I can be kind of rough sometimes depending on what I'm doing. What stupid thing I'm doing on stage, I should say. That's when it gets rough, is when maybe my balance isn't so well and I'm trying to jump from a bass rig to a drum set riser. I don't know. But, yeah, those have been really good basses on the road, and I use Stingrays as well. They've really hooked me up with some nice Stingrays over the years, also. So yeah, I don't use too many of the boutique stuff. I like, and I've got a Fender Jazz that I love. It's a '65 Fender Jazz, so kind of right up the middle on just good, solid bass sounds on the instruments I use.
As basses age and kind of fall into their own, they almost turn into boutique instruments themselves because you can't there's only so many of them out there.
Yeah, isn't that the beautiful thing about real instruments?
Yeah.
I mean, not that I need financial value out of my instruments because I don't ever want to sell them. Heck, if I'm gone one day, I want my children to enjoy them. But yeah, they're pieces of art. They don't necessarily decrease in value. They get better with age.
Even beat up and worn. We were chatting with Andy Sichon, who plays with Billy Joel, and he's got a Fender that you can feel on the back of the neck a very slight divot because it's been played like where B is so long.
Wow, a divot in the wood.
In the wood. And
wow.
So you can be in the dark and just run your hand on the back of that neck, and you go,
and you know where you are.
Here's B, right? Right?
Well, that gives me an idea. I use the glow-in-the-dark dots because sometimes we'll be on a really dark stage.
Yeah.
So for fret markers, I got 5, 7, and 12 marked. So when I look down, I got glow-in-the-dark.
Yeah.
That'd be cool to put something back there on the back that I could feel. That'd be real cool.
It's so subtle, but it kind of reminds me, back in the day when they started with phones, they used to put a little dimple in the middle key so you could tell where 5 was, or those 12 key calculators or something. It was just that little hint, and it was ever so subtle, but he loves that neck, and it's grimy because it's got like been exposed to smoke from bars.
A little bit of stuff on there.
Yeah. And he's like, I don't want to clean it up. I don't want to do anything that'll change it. It's perfect the way it is, you know, and it's had its own life and it's got there. So moving along string wise, anything particular?
I've always loved Ernie Ball strings. Yeah, for sure. All the way, man.
But I know you guys have, Collective Soul has an extensive tour date. Are you planning any touring for Serengeti Drivers?
I'm playing a couple shows here in Atlanta this week for the release. Collective Soul's off the road September 20th, and we're all over before then with the Rock and Roll Express tour. But that gives me the fall to book some more solo shows for sure. I'm going to book as many as I can. Try to get on some of the soft ticket stuff that I'll be in front of a decent size audience instead of, you know, the hardcore folks that already know the record and already know my history with Collective Soul. I'd like to, you know, try to get out and do some festivals, basically as much as I can do in the fall.
Gotcha. And the best place to look if people want to know, I know particular about you, would be willturpin.com.
Yep, the website's willturpin.com. Facebook is Will Turpin. And same thing with Collective Soul. If you just Facebook search Collective Soul, Twitter's at Collective Soul. It's all pretty simple.
Got you. And I did see the whole tour list on collectivesoul.com.
That's right. Yeah, come see us.
Gotcha.
Come see the rock show.
There you go. Well, Will, we appreciate you taking time to share your part of your journey, talk to us about the new projects. Make sure you keep us in the loop about new things coming up. Really excited and really enjoyed listening to Serengeti Drivers. I encourage people, I know they have to wait till Friday, but when they see this, most likely will have already dropped. So, you know, find Serengeti Drivers and give it a listen.
Much appreciated, Raul, man. Thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, people, you've seen him here. Will Turpin coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks for bassing out with us here on bassmusicianmagazine.com.